All right, everybody. All right. Thank you for the patience. Getting all connected was took a few more minutes than I hoped. Okay. So joining us today, we have two gentlemen from Google. Is he? Yeah, I've got my back to the camera, so he's making faces, isn't he? I can imagine. Okay. So first, over on that far screen is Stephen. Stephen began his career working in the research consulting sector, where he specialized in IT topics such as cloud computing. Given his interest in education, he moved to the Google Enterprise Education team 3 years ago, and has been working ever since to help bring Google technologies such as Google Apps and Chromebooks to K-12 and higher ed. He is excited to work with schools as they move to the web and increase student access to technology. And so we've been working, Kate, James, and myself have worked directly with Stephen. He's been out to Leiden, and so he's out and about, again, guiding school districts through all these transitions. And Jaime is our keynote speaker. Jaime Casap is the Global Educational Evangelist at Google. Jaime evangelizes the power and potential of the web, technology, and Google tools in education. He helps educational organizations across the world find ways to utilize these tools in support of new learning models. His team is responsible for bringing Google tools to millions of administrators, teachers, and students across the globe. Jaime was named one of Tech and Learning's top 10 most influential in education and is South by Southwest's distinguished speaker for 2013. So Jaime's going to speak to us for about 40-45 minutes. So go ahead.
Oh, technology has moved so much faster. All right, you guys hear me okay? All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I couldn't be there in person, but I can't deal with that Chicago area 20-degree weather. No, I'm kidding. I'm just, it's actually cold here in Phoenix. I'm talking to you guys from Phoenix. It's about 55 degrees this morning, and we're freezing our butts off here, so I can't imagine what it would be like in other parts of the country. But we'll get through it. Anyway, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I want to talk to you guys about what we're doing in the space, what some of the trends are, some of the things that we're seeing, and then if we have time at the end, we'll answer any questions, or obviously you can ask any questions in the future, and we'll be able to answer those as well. As a matter of fact, Stephen's going to run the slides for me, so I'm just going to say next slide at the end of these, and so that way we can see me and the slides at the same time. So next slide. Next slide. To start with, in terms of questions, just wanted to give you some contact information. I am pretty heavy on Twitter, Google+, and I write a blog on education and technology and education. So make sure that it's a great way to have a conversation. So it's a great way to keep a conversation going. It's a great way to answer questions and let everyone else see the answers to these questions so that we can keep the conversation going. So I'm pretty heavily involved in the EdChat hashtag and EdTech hashtag and others as well. So that's contact information. Please make sure you get that, and if it makes sense, follow me, and we can have conversations about what's going on in the space. Anyway, next slide. So think about where we are today and what's going on. These are the kind of the areas that I want to cover and talk a little bit about, because this is a really, really exciting time. I spent the last couple of weeks diving into some of the things that we're going to be focused on for next year, and then also looking a lot at some of the trends and some of the things that are going on in the space, and you guys that are at the cutting edge of some really, really interesting things that are going on in education, but specifically in how we utilize technology to enable and support education. So that's really exciting. Next slide. So to kind of kick it off, I always like to level set the conversation and remind folks that one of the reasons why we set up education, you look back at the history of education and why we developed what we're developing and why we are where we are today, was the idea was that we needed an educated country. And so we set up education programs to help grow our nation. And for the most part, it worked relatively well for a really, really long time. And I'm a direct result of that. I'm a first-generation American who grew up in Hell's Kitchen in New York on welfare with a single mother and no father, you know, on welfare. All the stereotypes that you have of kids that grow up the way I grew up. And what's exciting about that kind of opportunity is that education was my silver bullet, right? Education helped me create an environment where my children don't have to go through what I went through, right? And so I have two kids, and so I have a 20-year-old and an 11-year-old. When you think about their lives compared to my life, we've already broken the cycle of poverty. We've broken the cycle of need in just one generation, all because of education. Where, you know, I grew up complaining about having to spend time in social services offices or welfare offices and spend all day with caseworkers and those types of things. You know, my 11-year-old wakes up and complains that he's got to do a system update on his PlayStation 3 before he can play Call of Duty, right? I mean, it's just a completely different mindset, where my 20-year-old is in her second year of college, and she never asked if she had to go to college. She never, you know, she just assumed that she was going to college. She assumed she's going to graduate school. She also assumes that I'm paying for it, but, you know, that's a good problem to have, right? So that's the cycle that we can break with education. And the problem is, and one of the things that was disturbing over the last, that I've been kind of discovering over the last 6 months or so, is that that's getting harder and harder to do. The equity issues in this country are getting harder and harder to overcome. And so education is going to be even more important, and we're going to have to find more ways to use education to break that cycle, because we have some issues that we're dealing with that historically we used to be able to deal with just education, but the numbers are separating more and more. You know, we know that we have families in this country, that those that make less than $30,000 a year have less than, you know, a 20% chance of graduating from high school and those types of things. So we can literally break the cycle of poverty if we focus on education, and that's really, really critical to me, obviously, for lots of different reasons. Next slide. The other reason that we have to look at education in a different way is that the jobs that we are preparing our kids for don't necessarily exist yet, right? So if you think about what the job will look like in the future, we're training our students, we're preparing our students, we're giving them education for jobs that don't exist, to use technology that doesn't exist, to solve problems that don't exist, right? So that's our job, is to focus on how do we prepare our kids for that world, because we don't know what those jobs are going to look like. When I graduated high school, this job that I currently hold and sit in did not exist. And so that's going to be true for this next generation of students. So it's really, really important that we focus on this, because, you know, back in the 70s when I was in school, we were okay with the fact that 30% of our students, our workforce, didn't have or had college degrees, and 70% didn't. We were okay with that because we lived in a different world. We don't live in that industrial factory world anymore. We live in a knowledge economy, and so knowledge is going to be the critical thing. Next slide. Steven's slacking off on his duties there. So, you know, when we think about the jobs that we're preparing our kids for, we have to think about the fact that most jobs in the future are going to require some kind of post-secondary education. It's going to require some kind of skill set that is beyond the high school degree. We're going to need to get them to high school, but we're going to need to give them some kind of skill set. And that's already true today. We're starting to see those trends today. If you start looking in some of the places in this country where we have really, really low unemployment rates, Silicon Valley, some places you know, deep in New York, these are jobs that require some kind of post-secondary education. And we know the jobs of the future are going to require some kind of post-high school degree or some kind of post-high school training to prepare them for the jobs that are going to be available 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Next slide. And at the current rate that we're going, we're not doing so hot, right? So we got at best a 75% success rate. At worst, if you're Black or Latino and poor in this country, you have a a 40% chance of graduating from high school, and even if you go to college, you have less than 25% chance of graduating from college. So we're not preparing not only our kids, but we're not preparing a labor market or an economy that's knowledge-based, that's going to be based on competing on a global scale, and so that's what we need to focus on. So next slide. So we need to prepare kids for jobs that don't even necessarily exist yet, and we can't see what's around the corner. Now, that's kind of like the state of things in the way I see it in terms of what's going on in education. Next slide. The good news, the great news, is that we are an unbelievable time in education. This is a really, really exciting time in education. I'm sure lots of you can feel this. There's lots of things that are going on into space. Lots of companies are focused on ed tech. Lots of organizations are focused on improving education. Lots of schools are doing things in completely different ways. You know, we're finding lots of things that we're normally used to in other industries, right? I mean, how many of you still get your checks delivered to you by the HR person and then you go to the bank on Friday and deposit them, right? Or how many of you go in to see a teller, or how many of you don't shop online, or how many, you know, the things that we're starting to, the trends that we're starting to see in education are trends that we've been seeing in other industries for years and years and years. And so what's exciting about that is that the common denominator, I think, is the web, and how do we utilize the web. So next slide. So when we think about the web, I always like to remind folks that it wasn't that long ago that we used to have to call the internet. You remember we used to have to make phone calls to the internet, and most of the time the internet was rude and wouldn't talk to us. Most of the time the internet would hang up on us. Most of the time we wouldn't be able to get through for hours. And our reward for that experience was a bunch of websites that had links to words, that had links to words, that had links to words. It was that kind of experience that we were so excited about. But think about what we're doing on the web today. I mean, how many of you shop online? How many of you can go a couple of days without access to the web in any capacity, right? Some of you are raising your hand, and I would like to put you to the test. So hit me up on Twitter. The key thing here is that the web has become part of our lives, and it's something that we utilize in lots of different ways, for information, for resources, for the relationships that we manage, for having conversations just like this, where we can bring people into rooms that wasn't possible 5 years ago. So the web has been moving at a pace that's been unbelievably rapid, but it's only been 10, 15 years that we're talking about. So next slide. So it makes sense that education hasn't been able to keep up with this, because I think we're exactly where we need to be. I think we've had good 10 to 15 years of the web and how it's infiltrated our lives, and now we're looking at a new way to utilize this tool, this skill set. Because 10 years ago, the web wasn't ready for education. 5 years ago, the web wasn't ready for education. But if you think about all the things that we can do with the web today, and all the possibilities that we have in front of us, you can see that it makes sense that it's time to start thinking about how do we utilize the web in education. So next slide. The other factor in all this is that technology is not new to this generation. And I don't necessarily mean that they're digital natives, because I'm going to get into that in a second. But the key thing here is to remember that technology is as old as whatever it is that you're born into. So in other words, think about a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, and think about what they've experienced in their lives so far, and the fact that for a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old who's working with technology and is going to be growing up in this technology world, you know, the iPad 1 will be the worst technology they'll ever see in their entire lives, right? I mean, that's their Commodore 64. You know, so how we make fun of Commodore 64, that's what they're going to do. They're going to make fun of the iPhone and the iPad and the Chromebook and anything else that we throw at them right now. That's the worst technology they'll ever see, because technology is just part of their infrastructure. It's just part of their lives. Now, I don't want, next slide, I don't want that to mean that we think that they don't need to be trained on how to use technology, that they don't need to know how to use and utilize the web and the skills that are required to do the things that they need to do in this complex world that we live in. Because if you do a search for multitasking, you see all the time articles that talk about how kids can multitask today, and kids are different today. And as someone who has 2 kids, I would argue that that is absolutely not true. Multitasking does not exist. Evolution has not happened that fast. That students cannot multitask. But what they are doing differently is they're processing information in a different way than we did. They're accessing information in a different way than we did. So they're doing things differently than we did, than we do. And so when I think about, you know, a couple years ago, we took my 20-year-old on one of our summer vacations, and we went to Hawaii. You know, we pick a new place that we've never been to, and so we went to Hawaii, and she doesn't like to fly. She's scared to fly. She's nervous, and so as any good parent, you know, I bribed her and drugged her and put her on an airplane, and we went to Hawaii. And I bribed her because she's a musician and she wanted a ukulele, so we bought a ukulele. We went to the ukulele store as soon as we got to Hawaii, and we bought a ukulele. And as we were walking out of the store, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that there were instruction books and videos on how to play the ukulele. Right? So this is modern stuff that's available, books and videos on how to play the ukulele. And so I said to her, would you like to pick up a book or video on how to play the ukulele? And she looked at me like I was from outer space. She looked at me like I was insane. And I'm a pretty hip guy. I mean, you know, when it comes to 20-year-olds, there's not a lot of other 20-year-olds that have hipper fathers than she does. And she looked at me like I was wearing black socks pulled up to my knees and shorts tucked into, you know, with my shirt tucked into my shorts. She thought I was insane, because how is she going to learn how to play the ukulele? Right, she's going to watch YouTube videos, and she's going to learn how to play songs from other people that teach her how to play songs. But not only that, she's going to learn how to play the right way from one person that really connects with her in a way that the instructor might not even know they're connecting with her. And she's going to learn how to play the ukulele. And so they're processing information in a different way. Next slide. This is a picture here of my 11-year-old. And so what you're witnessing here is I'm sitting next to him on the couch, and I'm trying to be a good, you know, patriotic American, and I'm watching football. And this is literally from just a couple weeks ago. Watching football, and I turn to my left, and I see this. This is what I see. I see an 11-year-old sitting on the couch, and on one computer, he is playing Minecraft, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with Minecraft and the addiction that's going on with Minecraft. Oh, if you don't know Minecraft, you will. And on his Chromebook, he's watching videos on how to play Minecraft. So he's learning while he's doing, and he's got 2 machines at the same time on a Sunday at 11 o'clock in the morning. So to our kids, learning doesn't happen between Monday and Friday, between this hour and this hour. They're constantly learning. And this whole Minecraft has evolved to the point where I'm watching my 11-year-old evolve in his learning all on his own, where he went from, you know, just learning how to play this game, watching videos and learning how to play it, to walking around Home Depot last week, him apologizing to me because he had to break into my server. He hacked into my server, took about 100, 200 megs of hard drive space, told me not to worry, that he set up the HTTPS settings so that no one else can break into any other partitions of the server, and that he only invited a couple of friends and he's monitoring the whole thing. Don't worry, they're setting up their own little Minecraft world. And I'm trying to buy light bulbs at Home Depot and halfway paying attention to this kid, and I turn to him and I'm like, what are you talking about, right? What are you, insane? And I'm like, how did you learn how to do this? And he learned how to do this on his own, watching videos, talking to others, learning from each other. This is how they're doing these things. And so these kids are growing up and processing information in a completely different way. Next slide. And so when I think about my 20-year-old and I think about my 11-year-old, my 20-year-old is growing up with technology. But the truth is we've all grown up with technology, however we define that technology. And we've all grew up with technology. But the difference between my 20-year-old and my 11-year-old is my 11-year-old is growing up on the web. That's where they live, and that's where they get their resources, and that's how they process information. That's where they manage a lot of their relationships. And I'm not saying that they manage all their relationships and it's 100% web and that there's no human contact, because my kid still goes outside and plays in the yard and grabs his friends and they still play. But where they start looking for things. I mean, think about the last time you saw an 11-year-old ask you where the encyclopedias are so that they can look up something, right? They don't think that. They don't even know what encyclopedias are, right? So it's a different generation. Next slide. And when you think about what we're trying to do in this space, the two things aren't correlating. And I think we're at that point in 2013 where they need to start correlating. And this is a picture that I took from the New York Times a couple months ago about a new service in New York where kids were they're not allowed to bring in their technology into school, so they have to check it at this van. And this van charges them $1 a day to hold on to their technology. And I look at this picture and I think about the fact that the world's information is at their fingertips, and we're asking them to check it at a van. Right? That's what. And when we think about what that actually means, it feels a lot like we're trying to stop progress as opposed to actually figuring out how to utilize what's available to us. Next slide. And understanding the dangers of what is out on the web is no different to me than understanding what the dangers are in the world. And so how we prepare our kids make a lot of sense. And again, it's not about just being digital natives because they're born in this digital world. What our job is to teach them how to be as digital leaders. How do we take them from just knowing how to use the web to really, really taking advantage of it and really utilizing it and really making sure that they're creating the right reputation, the right digital footprint, the right resource, everything that is available to them. Because at the end of the day, when they're going to go into the workforce, their resume is going to mean a lot less than their digital footprint. Their resume is going to mean a lot less than their reputation. Their resume is going to mean a lot less than how much added value they've added to the world. These are the things that are being tracked literally as we speak on the web, and that's the world we're creating. So I like to think of it in the simplest terms, having 2 kids, is that I want to teach my kids how to cross the street. I'm not going to try to ban the cars. So the whole banning of the web doesn't make sense anymore. So we need to teach our kids how to cross the digital street. We need to teach them how to be good digital citizens, but more importantly, how to take the stuff that they learn and become digital leaders. And I think that's really, really critical. Next slide. And we're starting to see this in lots and lots and lots of schools where the web is being utilized in ways that we couldn't even imagine. And whether you're using Google Apps for education, or whether you're using the Khan Academy, or whether you're utilizing Wikipedia in lots of different ways, or the New York Times, or anything that you find available online, we're starting to see some of the content, we're starting to see some of the methodology coming from the web and being utilized in schools. And it's funny to talk to kids who say, they're in school and they're using Google Apps all day, and they say, no, I don't use the web, I use Google Apps, which is to the point where they don't even recognize the web, right? They're just seeing tools and they're utilizing tools. Next slide. And so for us, what we're focused on, what we're trying to do is, we want to see entire schools not necessarily just do one-to-one programs. That's not what this is about, but literally transform their learning environments so that they're actually utilizing the capability and the capacity of what the web can deliver in lots of different new learning models. Next slide. So we want to see it move from that, and we're starting to see it in different schools at different grade levels. Next slide. And so what we're starting to see is the web as a learning platform. If you think about all the new learning models, whether we're talking about flipped classrooms or blended learning or distance learning, and for example, in distance learning, back in the year 2000, there were 45,000 kids who took some kind of online distance course, and last year it was 3 million. So just to show you where that number is headed, all these new learning models that we're creating, the web is the central platform that gives you the capability to do that. The web gives you the advantage of being able to use the tools that are available in ways that we're just starting to figure out, which is what's really exciting. Next slide. Because when we think about this generation of kids and what they're going to need, and we think about the skills they're going to need, they're really, really critical to focus on. Next slide. And you've seen these in lots of different ways, whether they're Tony Wagner's survival skills, or the 21st century skills. which, by the way, I'm not a big fan of the word 21st century skills, because I believe these are skills that kids need today. To the point where and the other reason is I just have absolutely no idea what century we're currently in. I'm very confused by that. So I don't like using the phrase the 21st century skills, because I think these are skills that kids need today. So I want to dive a little bit into these. Next slide. When we think about communication has dramatically changed. Where it used to be, we used to need to teach kids how to read and write, which totally makes sense. Now we have to teach them how to read and write in a global world. We need to teach them how to read and write in a world that demands everything from a 20-page white paper with in-depth research to how to get a message out in 140 characters, and everything in between. And so being able to communicate has dramatically changed, and we need to figure out ways to incorporate the communication skill set on a global scale in the things that we do in education. And I think about how easy it was for me to think about communication when I was in school. And I remember even in college, I remember graduating from college thinking, I'm so glad I'm leaving, because I wouldn't be able to deal with this whole new world of this Windows 3.0 world. I'm not going to be able to handle that. I'm a WordPerfect 5.1 guy, and that's how I communicate, right? So WordPerfect 5.1, I would create WordPerfect 5.1 and then overhead transparency paper, and I would draw charts and put them on my overhead transparency machine. And I thought the expectations would dramatically change, and they haven't dramatically changed that much. And so I think about how much we need to teach our kids how to communicate and understand cultural differences when they communicate, and understand how when they communicate, what they say is public record forever, right? And how a lot of it they can't control after the fact, so they have to learn how to control before the fact. Like, a bunch of you are probably saying mean things about me on Twitter right now, and I have no control over that, right? So this is what we have to be able to teach our kids, is how to really communicate, not only on an individual scale, but on a global scale, but also in a collaborative way. Next slide. And we've been talking a lot about collaboration for a long time, but collaboration is absolutely critical. I think about the fact that my team is all over the world. I think about all the folks that we work with. I think about how when we think about education, it's a very individualized sport, right? You as an individual, you go to class, you get a grade, you take a test. It's about you. And I remember being asked as a student, did you do your own work, right? And I think about that, and I think about going up to Sundar or someone over, or Larry at Google, and saying, here's my strategy document. I worked on this over the break by myself. Nobody helped me. My parents didn't help me, I swear. It's all me. I did it all by myself. And what his response would be to that. And when we think about our current education environment, if you think about your typical 6th grade test, we give out a test to students, and they sit and they take their test. Now imagine one of those students got up at the end of the test and walked up to the front of the class with another student holding the test, and they said to you, we did this together. What your reaction would be, right? We have to wonder why collaboration is cheating. And so it makes sense to think about, how do we teach collaboration, because they will be working together. And right now what we're doing is you do everything on your own, and then we push them out the door and we say, good luck, go work with others. And in reality, they need to learn how to work with others right from the beginning. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about this already, but just to kind of highlight the point, we need to have our kids start thinking and not memorizing. We need critical thinkers and problem solvers. We have lots of issues to solve, and we're going to need lots of great problem solvers. And when I talk to kids, and especially when I talk to low-income kids, and I talk to them about my story and what I focused on, I encourage them to think about what problem they want to solve. What problems do they want to solve, and to start thinking about those problems and figuring out what their education looks like to solve those problems. Because memorizing facts don't make sense anymore. Memorizing dates doesn't make sense anymore. As a parent, I thought one of the benefits of being a parent would be that I could make things up whenever I wanted to. I could just make up answers whenever my kids asked me questions. And now that world doesn't exist anymore, because when I try to make something up. My 11-year-old, picks up his phone and he goes, Papi, I don't know if that's true, and he starts searching for information. So I'm, as an adult, being vetted every day by my 11-year-old. So having to memorize things doesn't make sense. Having them process information makes a lot more sense. Having them take information and make sense of that information is what the skill set needs to be. And next slide. And when you think about that in terms of the information that's available, all the world's information is available at our fingertips, and it can be overwhelming. So how do we make them make sense of that information? How do we teach them to vet information? How do we teach them to do real research? And we've seen this already. We've seen, our kids come up to us and say, I can't find it. And it's just, because it wasn't the first result that came up on Google or whatever search engine they use, right? So we need them to dive into information and make sense of it, because most of the world's information is still not online. And so having a hard time finding information makes sense right now. So teaching them how to analyze and how to search. And I bet that most of us agree that this is not a skill set that we've even developed, right? We always learn how to search for we always learn new search techniques every day. So imagine what our kids are going through when they're just used to typing in a search bar. So being able to analyze information and make sense of information is critical. Next slide. And finally, the idea here is that we have enough evidence that we learn in different ways. And so we're starting to see some things around how do we take this skill set, how do we take communication, collaboration, problem solving, analytical skills, all these things, and do it in a personalized way, because we have enough evidence now, there's enough information in the learning sciences to know that we all learn in different ways. And how I know this is true is because when I was a kid, someone would try to explain something to me, and I wouldn't be able to, and I wouldn't understand it. They would try to explain it to me again the same way, but just louder. And then when I didn't understand it the third time, they would yell at me and say, "What do you need me to draw you a picture?" Right? That was an insult. Remember when that was an insult? And what's the answer today? Yes, I need you to draw me a picture. So we have enough evidence that just that we all learn in different ways. So it probably makes sense that we look at how we're testing and assessing people, because if they all learn in different ways, they probably all test in different ways too. So maybe some personalized type of assessment makes sense. And I think that's one of the conversations that we're going to be having in the next couple of years is how do we do assessment? How do we do competency assessments? How do we do peer assessments? How do we do individualized assessments? How do we do it to the point where we're not taking a bunch of 10-year-olds and putting them in a room and making them all take the same test the same way and thinking that those results are actually reflective of their skill set, because that's probably not true. Next slide. So when we think about technology, one of the critical things is the fact that we need to make sure that it's easy, that it's invisible, that it's as simple as it possibly is, so that we can get the technology, out of the way. Because next slide, because we agree that if we all agree that the web is important, that the web is part of our infrastructure now, that it's part of our everyday thing, it totally makes sense to have it in the classroom. The hard thing is then, well, what do we need to do to prepare for that, and what do we do to scale and manage that so that it makes sense? Because the day that I was dreading over the break more than any other day the last couple weeks was December 26th, which I call Family Technical Support Day, where all my relatives who got new toys and new technology, new things, I have to spend the day dealing with their issues. Like, what's Wi-Fi, and what do I do with this? And I turn into in-law consultant, right, for my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, and by the end of the day, I'm a marriage counselor because this person doesn't know how to do this. It's just a big mess. This year wasn't so bad, but I dread that day every year because managing technology is hard. If it's hard to put a router, a computer, a laptop, and a tablet together for two people in one house, I can't imagine how hard it is to put 30,000 machines in the school system with 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And it just gets complicated really quickly. Next slide. And so we have to keep in mind our philosophy, kind of our mindset, is that technology is just a tool. You know, it's not, technology is not the silver bullet. I always like to make sure I make this fact that education is a silver bullet. Great education is a silver bullet. Technology is just a tool. It's there to enable and support. And if it's not enabling and it's not supporting what you want to do from your, you know, your typical closed loop education system of setting the objectives, doing the lessons, and doing the assessment, if it's not there to support and enable that, don't use it, right? It has to be easy. It has to be invisible. It has to be part of the infrastructure. Next slide. And so for us, technology is web-based, right? So technology is not the hardware. For us, it's not about the devices that you're currently using. It's about what you're doing with those devices. And so what we're starting to, you know, from our perspective, Google Apps for Education is the web. It has been since we introduced it 6 years ago. And in the last couple of years that it's been utilized in K-12, it literally is being utilized, it's utilizing the web. And so what we see is the opportunity to use the web as a learning enabling a support tool as opposed to it being some separate thing. Next slide. Now, like I said, technical support is hard, so what we want to see is not just classrooms of great use of technology or the great use of the web, but entire systems. Next slide. Because it gets really hard. I travel around the world, and I spend lots of times in great classrooms, and every school will show me the one class that has all the stuff working really well. And you know, the teachers are using technology, the students are using technology, everything's great. But then when you say, how do you get into an entire system, that's when it gets really, really hard because it gets hard to manage. Now, next slide. How do we do this? Because it's not just about you know, just saying that it's important. It's about making sure that you have some pieces in place. So I want to touch on these a little bit, which is about making sure that you have the right access and that you have the right strategy for what you're doing and that you have all the pieces in place. So next slide. The most important thing is having access, right? So you have to have access, you have to have, and that starts with broadband, that starts with the web, that starts with what applications you have available. All the things that you have is what is that high quality material you have, because the web at the end of the day is really a bunch of tools that are being utilized in lots of different ways. Wikipedia is a tool set that's being utilized by education and by business and by writers and by filmmakers, and it's just the tools are available and we have to find them. Sometimes they're not easily identifiable as an education tool. Lots of the YouTube videos that we use in our schools, in our classes, weren't designed for education, but through crowdsourcing, through different resources that kind of that help us find what these resources are, help us identify these resources in lots of different ways. But the quality of those resources are getting better and better. So we have to make sure that we have the right access to broadband, to the web, so that we can utilize these tools. And again, when they're there to support, enable what it is that you're doing in your school. Next slide. And these are tools that you can use anywhere, any place. I think one of the fundamental things that's going to shift in the next couple of years is that what we look at in terms of learning isn't so much a school anymore. It isn't so much going to school between this day and between Monday and Friday, between 8 and 3, and that's what school is. Education is going to be bigger and broader than that. And these tools are going to be able to be utilized from anywhere. And so all of a sudden now flipped classrooms make sense and blended learning models make sense. And how do we how do we give kids information so that they're using these tools when it's appropriate for them, so it doesn't fit within the standard model, because our kids don't fit in that standard model anymore. So for us, we're going to keep giving you tools that you can use in lots of different ways. Next slide. So for example, you know, for those of you who are using Google Apps for Education in the classroom, I can sit here and give you 10 different ways that teachers are using Google Apps in the classroom, but you can give me 100 more ways. Everything from making life easier and using administrative tool in an administrative way, to doing collaborative lesson plans, to having kids work on collaborative projects together, to using Google Sites to create their own e-portfolios and utilizing those portfolios throughout their career in the schools that they're in. So Google Apps for Education is that tool set for us, the thing that started it for us, and it's literally a communication, collaboration, problem-solving platform that you can use. But again, it's not the only tool that's available on the web. But from a Google perspective, it's one of, obviously something that we use. And by the way, I should also mention that we use Google Apps to run our organization. So we run Google with the same tools that you're using in your schools. So we run it with Gmail and Calendar and Docs and spreadsheets and sites, and as you can see, Google Hangouts and other things that we utilize. So we're running our organization with the same tools that you're using in your schools. So your students are using the same tools that we use at Google. Next slide. We launched YouTube for schools, YouTube in education. The tools that are available for us in YouTube are getting better and better. And he's not going to the next slide, but the next slide is about YouTube. So we're starting to see the use of YouTube in schools. I don't know if you guys are using YouTube in schools, but it's different than YouTube in general. So these are education videos that have an education focus with no comments, no related videos. It's all education videos that are available. I guess I lost Steven's slides again. So the next slide is really focused on the resources that are available for students. I'm sorry, for educators. Because at the end of the day, the fundamental shifts that we're looking for are going to come from our teachers. And the role of the teacher is absolutely critical. And as someone, I think about my life and my career. I've had a great career. I've had, and hopefully I'm not retiring. I'm looking forward to another great part of my career. But also, I think about all the influential people in my life, and I think about my 4th grade teacher and my 6th grade teacher and my 8th grade teacher, and those are the fundamental people who helped me shape, who helped shape who I am, even to this day. And so when I think about teachers, the role of the teacher is even going to be more important in this kind of new world, where I don't like the word facilitator, because I don't like facilitators. I like educators. I like coaches. I like people who know more than I do, who are teaching me things. And I think that's really the fundamental role of the teacher. Next slide, Stephen. And so for us, we want to make sure that you have resources available to us, available to you. So we have as much as we have out there. We're going to continue to push more out there. We have, blogs and training material. We have a community. We have all this stuff that's available for you from at least Google. But again, a sliver of what's available long-term that's out there is there's still stuff that we're working on, but also communities are creating lots of great resources for teachers as well. Next slide. And then we have to look at the right tools to scale. And so how do we use the right tools? How do we scale with the right tools? And then for us, obviously, Chromebooks are the answer. Next slide. And what's interesting about the Chromebook is that they're designed with the web in mind, that the web is what we want to focus on. The web is where our resources are. The web is where our kids are living. And so we want to make sure that we had a machine that got you to the web and got everything else out of the way. And more importantly, so that you can manage and scale the technology without worrying about it becoming something that gets in your way. And so the technology and scaling the technology is the most important part. And so for us, the Chromebook gives us the opportunity to put machines in a classroom so that your 3rd graders have a different experience than your 6th graders, that have a different experience than your 9th graders, and it doesn't matter which machine they pick up. And I've seen this in action. I've been in schools where I've seen Chromebooks working in action, and it's fascinating to watch kids use these devices the way they use textbooks, or the way they use their pens, or the way they use their notebooks. They're not these big shiny objects. They grab these machines and they look things up and they find information, and they do critical work on these machines, and then they put them away, and the next kid comes in, picks them up, and does the same thing, but from their perspective. And so being able to see this across the board has been very helpful to us to identify how we can make this even better. And so we continue to make the Chromebook and the Chrome operating system the fundamental gateway to utilize the web in lots of different ways. And also, we will continue to make the managing of these machines even more important. Next slide. I think you're a couple slides down, Stephen. If you can go to the one more, and then one more. And so for kind of to think about what I'm seeing in the space and to kind of summarize, what we're seeing in this space is a fundamental shift, a paradigm shift, to think about how do we create new learning models, and how do we utilize the web in these new learning models, and how do we utilize a role of a teacher as being a coach and a teacher so that kids are building the critical skills that they need around communication, problem solving, creativity, collaboration. These are the things that they're fundamentally focused on. And so this is a really, really exciting time in education. Next slide. And I know I kind of went through those slides fast, and I know there might be some questions. I don't know if we have time to answer any questions, but like I said, the buzz in education and what's going on in this space is exciting. I can fundamentally see a shift happening in education in the next couple of years, and so how we teach our kids and how our kids learn is going to fundamentally change, and we are, and you guys are at the forefront of this, and you are the folks who are going to be doing the majority of this. And when we look back on this in 10 years or 20 years, it's going to be this generation of educators that have fundamentally shifted what learning looks like for our students in this country, and that's really, really exciting.
Let's try that one. Okay, did we have any questions? I don't know what time. We're a little bit over on time, but we're doing good. Anything? Anyone? We double check our. Well, Jamie, I want to thank you for your time. Stephen, thank you. It's been great. I know it was your first day back from break, as it is ours, so it wasn't an easy thing, and you're an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours different than us. So again, appreciate your time and knowledge on all these things, and look forward to continuing to work with Google Apps for Education.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.